In 3, 2, 1. This is Acting Mastery. I'm Ben Matthews. In this episode, I'm thrilled to be joined by Brendan Rodriguez and Daniel Schwab. Daniel and Brendan are making a name for themselves in the world of casting, working alongside Robert Ulrich at Ulrich Dawson Kritzer Casting, one of the top casting offices in Los Angeles. Their casting track record so far includes working on major TV projects like Amazon's darkly comic superhero hit, The Boys, and its spin-off, Gen V, Zoe's Extraordinary Playlist for NBC, and Monarch for Fox. In this episode, Brenden and Daniel share their insights into the casting process, their experiences in the industry, and offer practical advice for actors who are looking to make their mark. Brenden and Daniel, welcome to the Acting Mastery podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
We're thrilled to have you guys. Yeah, we're thrilled to have you. And of course, we connected last year when we ran a workshop with you on Zoom, and we have another one coming up, which we're very excited about. In the year since I've seen you, it sounds like there's been a lot happening for you both. Why don't you bring us up to speed on what's been going on for you both?
Yeah, of course.
Sure.
Well, last time we chatted, obviously a lot of our expertise from the workshops comes from our work in casting. And just to catch the podcast audience up, Brendan and I have worked together now for 5 years. We met working together at Ulrich Dawson Kritzer Casting, and we've worked on a variety of shows through the years together. And have really built a relationship together professionally that has worked really well, and we've continued to work together to this day. The last major project that we worked on together was The Perfect Couple, which just came out on Netflix and is doing very well. I think right now, Brendan, is it number 1 on Netflix, I think? Hopefully.
I think it's number 1 on Netflix, apparently on IMDb. We're super excited about that.
Yeah.
So we definitely suggest that you watch that. It's a fun murder mystery. Nicole Kidman is at the helm of that. And then, Brendan, you want to kind of talk about the producing realm that we've moved into in the last couple of years?
Yeah. And other than that, it's been a couple years now that we've been, did a lot of our casting work with Robert Ulrich, or we do a lot of our casting work with Robert Ulrich, and Daniel has worked with other offices as well. But early on came on and also started helping Robert in a producerial way, helping him out with a small production company he had launched. He has produced and sold about 3 films. And so we've got a couple other projects that we've been shepherding with him. And I think that doing that with him has allowed us both to be able to branch off and start dabbling in that on our own. And so Daniel and I just wrapped 4 weeks on a feature film called The Surrender, starring Kate Burton and Colby Minifie, in which we were co-producing. Super excited about that. That was such a fun experience. Just racking up short films, trying to, hopefully make a bit of a splash at festivals next year, and get out there and meet some people, a little bit of calling cards for everyone. Just branching out in the industry.
Is the plan for both of you to stay in casting or to move into producing full time? What's the goal for you both?
Ooh, good question, Ben. Coming in with the hard questions. Well, we both have our own answers for that. I would say for me, in an odd and strange way that I never expected, casting has become the best day job. And I know it sounds weird to say it's a day job. It is literally that. But as creatives, and I started as an actor, and I think that when I flipped over to casting, I was thinking, oh, this isn't necessarily as creative of a job. Well, first of all, that's not true. Second of all, it has provided me, I don't want to speak for Brendan, but I know a lot of this is true of him and he can share this as well, but it's provided me a consistency of income, insurance and benefits and things that come along with the workplace that I never received as an actor before. And then it also has opened up the world of creative possibilities as far as meeting people in the business, right? Our boss, Robert Ulrich, who took a chance on both of us at the beginning who had no experience in this business, and then has opened doors for us in other ways, leading us to producing and all of these things. For me personally, I see myself continuing in casting as a baseline and then going from there. I think Brenda might have a different answer, but I'm just kind of excited to explore opportunities as they come.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, as far as with casting, I kind of fell into casting. I don't know that necessarily. I have spoken to some people in casting before who have told me that they wanted to be a casting director since they were
Yeah.
8, which kind of blows my mind because I don't think I even knew what a casting director. I just wasn't thinking about that position when I was watching TV and film at 8 years old. But I kind of fell into casting, kind of like Daniel said, because I met Robert Ulrich through a family member of mine who he's very close to. He took a chance on me, and it all just kind of snowballed from there. That was about 7 years ago. And I love casting, and I feel that it's been the best place for me to get my legs in the industry. I think also being able to have such a strong network of agents and managers, I think it's such a niche sector of the industry that doesn't typically, not saying it never does, but doesn't typically cross over to producing. So it has in some ways been my secret weapon in producing. I feel that I come from this casting background, and that my network isn't people in post production or people in on-set production, but rather it's the agents and managers who arguably are the most connected people in this business.
Right.
And as far as the future goes, I mean, I came from originally pre-Los Angeles. I came from a property management background, and that was quite the era of my life. I've got stories I could tell for days on that, but there was something affirming for me last year when I was shooting a short film in upstate New York, producing. I had always felt up until that point that my experience in Florida, where I'm originally from, where we're both originally from, was not something that spoke to what I was doing here in California. And then I was on set producing this, and I thought it's the exact same thing. It's project management, just in a more creative way with creative people. And I had that moment where I was like, I kind of have always been doing this. So as far as the future goes, yes, I would love to continue pushing forward and producing, continue growing that side of my career, but still very much love casting. I'm not at a point yet where I'm ready to say I no longer want to cast. I mean, I'm casting everything that I'm producing at this point as well.
Right. And I mean, how important is it, do you think, not just for, well, I mean, for actors, obviously, Daniel, you said you started as an actor. Brenden, did you also start as an actor?
I didn't, no.
No. Okay. Well, just how important do you think it is to stay open in this industry to whatever doors open up that you have the opportunity to walk through?
Yeah, very important. I feel like some of the biggest names in the industry that are doing big things have expanded beyond what they initially thought they were coming out here to do. I say coming out here, but you know what I mean? Coming out to the industry to do.
Yeah, I will say that, I mean, in so many ways, I think I've experienced this, but I think back to even being in school and having friends in school that were studying theater or film or whatever it was, something in the arts. And obviously, when you're young, you don't have a larger vision of the world or the industry. But I just remember a lot of people saying, "I only want to be an actor," or "I only want to be, a designer," whatever it is they were studying. And at the time, I was like, "Oh, that's great. That sounds cool." And I might have had those thoughts as well. The moment that I got out of that bubble into the real world, I realized, first of all, it's just really a challenge to be employed at all, ever in this business in any facet, especially for actors. But it doesn't even, I mean, now everyone knows that this business is constricting and everyone's struggling for work. And Brenden and I have been very fortunate to remain employed. And we're very grateful for that. But I just remember those thoughts of I only want to be this or I only want to be that. When I started to pursue acting, again, I was fortunate to get work, but I wasn't always employed. And one of the things that I did back then was once I joined the union, I was acting on stage and then I was also stage managing. And it's something that I enjoy because it kept me around the things that I loved. I wasn't necessarily doing the acting thing, but that didn't matter to me as much. I was remaining employed. And then bringing
Mm.
that into our conversation, what Brendan was saying, we started off our LA journey professionally in casting, and that was unexpected for both of us. But we followed the opportunities where they led, and then eventually those opportunities led to producing. And we could go on and on. They've led to other things. So for me personally, I kind of stopped putting blinders on what it was that I thought that I wanted and opened myself up to the reality that maybe there are other opportunities if only I allow myself to see them instead of just blocking them out. So I think it's incredibly important for actors or anyone in this business to stay open to other possibilities.
But now, probably more than ever, I think the industry's at a point where look how many people are starting to write their own content and get out there and make actors who did maybe come out here with, like Daniel said, initially saying, I'm coming out to act and portray somebody else's work. But now people are writing, they're getting their friends together, they're putting things in. I do feel in a way with some of the stuff that's happening in the industry right now, the constricting that Daniel's talking about, it almost feels like we're on like this precipice of this like independent art renaissance that's happening because more and more and more are people making this independent stuff that is blowing up and it's hitting mainstream in a way that I don't know that it was necessarily doing before. There are still actor friends of mine that I can think of who are like, I'm an actor and I'm an actor only. And that's fine and everyone has their journey. But I do think some of those people with that mindset can sometimes still find themselves feeling stagnant.
I sometimes use the analogy in class of casting, like actors going to auditions or putting down self-tapes. It's a little bit like trying to get into a nightclub and there's a very long line of people all trying to get in. And then along comes somebody who knows a door guy and the red velvet rope gets opened and they're ushered in
Yeah.
through nepotism. But then there are the people that are somehow finding that entry round the back, that back door into the industry. And I think creating your own work and your own opportunities seems to be that. And it seems like that's something that you guys are now up to very much yourselves. Do you want to speak to that? And maybe what your experience is like as casting, from working in casting, kind of seeing that long line of people all waiting to get in?
Yeah, I think that I think look, we've had actors before who we, especially back when we were in an office in an actual audition room, we would have, friends of ours who also happened to be actors who would sometimes come in and they would read for us in the room if we had sessions and we needed help and we needed a reader. And the general consensus coming out of those people would be that they learned more sitting in that room for 3-4 hours than they did in X amount of time studying, just because they were able to see, granted, it's not necessarily learning the technique that you learn in acting class and working with an acting teacher, but it's learning the actual, what is the other side of the industry, right? Which is the audition and the
Right.
audition room. It's very much its own thing, which is what, these workshops are great for. But I think that, yeah, I think it's an industry where I just don't, I think that those that tend to come and succeed the most are those that come in and kind of grab the bull by its horns and say, I'm going to make something of it myself. And rather than wait for this crazy industry to provide you with something.
Right.
Whether that's continuously being in class, constantly working on the craft, maybe networking, these are the things that continue to keep you feeling a part of this industry. And I almost just feel that you feed into it and it'll feed back to you. I just don't know that I believe in sitting around and waiting for the auditions to come to you.
Right.
Without actively doing something.
Yeah, that's great advice. And I think too, speaking back to your your analogy of the standing in line at the club and knowing the doorman or whatever it is, so many actors have the question of how do you build relationships with casting, and it's such a hard question. And post COVID, everything's changed, and there's no more offices and all of this, and there's all these challenges. Specifically speaking to the office that we work together in, which is Ulrich Dawson Kritzer Casting, it's a larger television office here in LA, and you know, we trust the relationships that we have with agents and managers implicitly. And I know that's very hard for actors to hear as well, because it's like, what if I can't get an agent or a manager? The reality is to get to us directly is pretty difficult, but relationships with anyone else that you have in this business and in this town are helpful as well, which we have experienced in our own professional lives. But going from the actor's perspective, the more that you can ingratiate yourself to people, to involve yourself with people. And a perfect example is acting mastery and knowing you, Ben, and knowing, everyone in that world, because obviously this podcast isn't about you, but you've got a lot of projects going on as well. And then you're having some success in your career too, which congratulations on that. We're super excited for you.
Thank you.
But people in your class that are taking your class know you, and some of them have met us, and that's been really cool. And we loved our time with that workshop last year, and we're excited for the new one that's coming up. But those relationships are the beginnings of things being built. And I will tell you, actually, I can't remember what it was, Brendan. We had some project that we were working on, and whether or not those actors that we saw in your workshop were submitted, or if we just thought of them, we set them up to audition. So that was the beginning of that relationship built with us for nothing
Yeah.
more than a class, and I'm not diminishing the class. I'm saying that was a very simple step. Take a class, get some advice from some casting people in LA, and hope for the best. Well, some people ended up auditioning, and that was incredible. And we remembered them and said, "Hey, we saw them in this workshop. They did great. We're going to send them along." Like, it's as simple as that, and yet also as complicated as that. So continuing to remain in community with people, continuing, like Brendan said, to create your own opportunities, and then you will naturally start to congregate around people that have the same mission and the same goals, work together with them, and move forward to build your tree of connections. I know that
Yeah.
sounds simple, but it's not simple, but it's doable, I should say.
Yeah, it isn't simple, but I do think that relationships just foster more relationships, right? And so these relationships that we talk about, it's not going out and schmoozing. I mean, the ones that actually result in work or something fruitful are those that are still organic, right? They're still people that you have a connection with. And sure, maybe you're talking about work, but there's a connection, there's a vibe between you. But I have found more than anything, especially when you talk about something like, again, when it comes to casting, we have been very grateful, very yeah, we've been very grateful that we've been able to remain employed so often. But that really, if we're speaking honestly, is because our boss is being employed and we are his team. And but if you when we talk about things that are happening on the other side, like the producing and whatnot, I can only speak for myself. That really has happened by just working with one person who has mentioned to somebody else that they've worked with me, who's mentioned to somebody else. And before you know it, word gets out that you are somebody who can maybe be a part of this project, who they might want to work with, and all of a sudden things just start coming to you. But you do have to. There is an effort that you have to make. You do have to put yourself out there. It doesn't just land on your lap.
Such great advice. You guys have spoken about the fact that you both met working with Robert Ulrich. Something I don't think that often gets talked about enough in this industry is the importance of mentors.
Mm.
How important has Robert been in terms of your career, and what have you learnt from him? And also, have there been other mentors that have had a big impact on you both?
There's going to be a lot of overlap here, but I'll share my experience, and Brendan, I'm sure, will have something to add. But for both of us, but for me specifically, right, I was on the acting side, and I moved to LA really as an actor. I mean, that's its own story, but I knew that I was always interested in casting. And to be honest with you, all that I ever really wanted when I moved here, I was putting out resumes and sending emails and doing all the things that you do when you don't know anyone in town yet. And I really just wanted to like have an internship and take someone's trash out and like, you know, be around them and soak up whatever I could. The problem with that was that I moved here not as a student. And so, internships are their own thing in Los Angeles. And so that wasn't really an option. And so honestly, when I started to get involved, and then again, it's a whole saga, but I met someone who ended up working at UDK Casting, and she put in a good word for me, which is really how it all started. Her name is Kimberly McKenna, and I'm always grateful to her for literally being my into that office. She got me the interview because I sent my resume that I had sent 50 times in advance of that interview, and no one had ever responded. And then I got an email from Brendan because he was working there at the time, and he said, "Hey, you want to come for an interview?" And I did, and we interviewed, and Brendan will roll his eyes at this, but all that we talked about in the interview was Broadway and Glee, because those are the only things that I knew about. Robert was the casting director for Glee and an Emmy-winning, casting director for that, and that was one of his landmark experiences professionally. So I had watched that, and I had watched him on the Glee project in college, seeing my future boss 10 years in advance of it. It was just so bizarre, but that's all that we talked about. At one point, he asked me, do you have any experience in casting? He said, if not, it's okay. We just want to know. I said, no, not really. He said, well, many of us have started without experience. And then again, long story short, I got the job and we ended up working together. But back to your question, he absolutely took a chance on me, and to Brendan as well, which I'm sure he'll share. But I would not have, it was the first time that I felt like I was connected to someone on the inside, I guess, for lack of a better way of saying it, in Hollywood. And it made all the difference in the world because literally from day one, I was thrown into the bullpen of just working in television casting, and I had no idea what I was doing. And I realize now why people don't get hired without experience, because it was a huge learning curve. Once you get past that and you start to work together, you know, all of that beginning was mentorship. Robert was teaching me everything. Brendan was teaching me everything. And while they didn't have time to teach me everything, and I'm forever grateful for those things, because then it formed me into the individual casting professional that I am today. But every step of the way, through phone calls and emails and watching how they worked and hearing how they negotiated, and how they would approach issues or how they would run a casting session, all of these things, that was all mentorship. That was all teaching and learning from my perspective, and it was invaluable. And then again, from there, relationships have grown, and I have now moved to another office, and my new bosses are incredible in their own ways, and they've taught me so much in a different way from a different perspective, right? Each person has their own way of approaching things, but mentorship is vital. I wish there was a better system in place to give it to everyone. But I mean, as much as you can, seek it out in any city that you're in any profession that you're in, because it's irreplaceable. Anyway, I'll finish. Brendan, what do you think?
Yeah. I mean, Daniel and I have similar experiences in some ways. Because again, as I said, I was not in this industry. I actually visited LA for the first time in 2012. I was visiting my cousin. So my first cousin, Blake Jenner, he's an actor and, was actually on the Glee Project, ended up winning the second season of the Glee Project. And through that became, a good friend of Robert's, being the host and casting director of it and whatnot. I actually came out here in 2012, met Robert very briefly, kind of thought nothing of it, went back to my life in Florida, and then 5 years later, came back out to visit again. I had just left that job with the plan to go back to South Florida and do similar work down there. Met Robert again, and at this point, he did not have an assistant. He wasn't actively looking though, but he had just his longtime assistant had just left and made like a career, pivoted to a different side of the career, more in the music industry. And so he had an opening, but wasn't really actively looking. And between Robert and Alex Newman, who casts Grey's Anatomy now, but has worked with Robert for many years prior. She is the casting director of Grey's Anatomy, but worked with Robert on Glee, on, just like Supernatural, all the long time running shows that he's worked on. Between the two of them, those were my mentors. The way that Daniel says, learning how to handle phone calls with agents and managers, how to foster those relationships. Those are the people that I learned from. So yeah, I mean, when you say how vital is mentorship, I mean, for us at least, there is no career without the mentors, because that, like, we were gifted really careers in this industry
Mm.
from people who had already been there for a very long time and who were well established. We were lucky truly to be in those rooms. I remember when I first got to his office, he was casting a film that he produced called Foster Boy. It's an independent film about, exposing the corruption inside the foster care system. And that was my first time sitting in a session. And somebody who, yes, I took drama classes and whatnot in high school, but I myself wasn't an actor. So I don't think that I ever necessarily knew what I thought was good acting at that time. I sat in one session and it all clicked. And I'll never forget writing on the session sheet next to the actor. I put like a star next to the one who I was like should get it, who I thought should get it, and he did. His name is Shane Paul McGee. He's an incredible actor, and that was a moment where I was like, okay, I'm learning. I'm learning the way through. I mean, truly one of the greats as far as casting goes.
Wow, how amazing! I'm very curious for you, Brenden, having not had an acting background and then witnessing that first in the room session. What was it that had that actor stand out?
There were a lot of good actors from what I remember, but there was something about Shane, and he's gone on to work on. I mean, I'm sure other things that I'm not thinking of right now, but I know that he was on that Natasha Lyonne series, Poker Face. He had an episode on there. He's gone on to do big things and work with great people. But there was something about he was so emotionally connected. And I had never seen something like that before. And that's not to say that everyone has to cry in an audition to get, I mean, that's not at all what it is, but he just was so emotionally connected. And while still being very flexible, right? Because I mean, I think, granted, you watch a movie or you watch a TV show and you don't know what happened on set. You don't know how well or not this particular actor takes notes, how well they take direction. You're just being given a final product. But those are the things that at least speaking for myself, that blow me away in the audition room, is when somebody's just takes the note. You give a note and they exceed expectations, because they're just, the acting muscle is that sharp that they're able to just, it's the subtleties. And ever since then, truly, I mean, Shane to me is like, probably because he was one of the first actors I saw in that light and it was my first session, but he is like, I've always just thought of him as such an incredible actor. I still do.
Wow.
It's interesting that you say that too, because it's we all remember our first. There's a wonderful actor named India de Beaufort, who I just remember as the first actor that made me feel something in an audition. I was hired on for Zoe's Extraordinary Playlist, and there were many incredible actors and many incredible auditions and many incredible roles. But to Brendan's point too, like, it's not about crying or being highly emotional or whatever. It's about being emotionally available and ready, and then somehow transmuting that to us in the room, because that's why both of us remember those individual specific actors at the beginning, because I remember feeling something. For me also, that's ended up, she was emotional, she was crying, but again, it's not about the tears, it's about the emotional availability and then being able to translate to us. I feel like for me personally, and I think Brenden, you kind of said this as well, whatever emotion it is, when we feel something on our end receiving an audition, that's when we are activated.
Really well said. I'm curious for you, Daniel, as an actor, having been an actor, having auditioned, what else did you begin to discover about the casting process when you were on the other side of it?
So much. I mean, I think the difference between realizing that I came from the theater world, so it's much different for sure. And again, the theater world in a smaller market. So as Brenden said, we both grew up in Florida, and I worked in the regional theater world in Florida, which there's a lot of great regional theater there, but it's not the same at all as the Los Angeles market. So they're very different things, but in the same way, obviously there are some similarities. I think though that especially in film and TV, there are just so many actors, and what we realize on our side that you can't realize on the acting side really unless you're told, is that it's so much less about you than you think, and that feels weird to hear and say, but what I think the most shocking thing to me coming to LA and getting a job at this top TV casting office, my expectation coming in was, okay, we're going to have auditions and there's going to be some really bad actors, there's going to be some okay actors, and then there's going to be a few good actors. I don't know why I thought that, but that's just what I thought. What actually ended up happening, at least from our perspective in our office, is that there are very few, if any, bad actors. Really, like if you are getting into the room, into the office, if you're getting a request from us or most offices, you kind of have already been vetted by an agent or manager, or someone else that we trust, and you're going to be good baseline. So that's just kind of like you're a good actor. Like that's just bare minimum.
Yeah.
And then there are some great actors, and then the ones that typically get the role aren't necessarily the best actors in the world, but they're great actors who are right for the role at the time, in the moment, that fits that box right then.
Right.
And that box could change at any moment. But I think that's the biggest thing that I had no idea about, and why it's so frustrating for actors. Because I remember being on that side and being frustrated, like why, I did such a good job in this audition or whatever, like whatever that is, it's so much more than that. And I hope that actors can like take that in and realize that you can release this need to book the thing, because it's not about that. It's about doing a good job for what you are in that moment to that office, and they will remember that and then place you in a better box somewhere in the future. Anyway, I could ramble on all day, but Brenden, I'm curious what you thought.
No, I mean, it's really well put. I mean, it's so funny when you say that, because I'm often asked, and I'm sure Daniel is too, be it in the workshop setting or just in social settings with friends who are actors. How often do you see terrible auditions and everybody's like waiting with bated breath for some hilarious stories, and you're like, honestly, kind of never. And it's so true. Like a terrible audition, I could probably count on one hand in the years that I've been doing this. It's just not. It's to Daniel's point. It's just really not about that. It's about right time, right place, right role, right fit. What one producer or one director may see, and there's so many cooks in the kitchen, especially in television, right? When we were casting for this film that we just also produced, you're going through it's an independent film, so you're going through a much smaller funnel of people. But once you're in TV, I mean, there's just so many factors. So it really should just be about, and this is coming from the non-actor, so forgive me for saying this, but I would think that it should just be about the love of the craft and understanding that it will hit when it needs to hit, and that it really isn't about you and what you could, that one beat that you feel you didn't master, that if you had done 2 more takes on the self-tape, you would have gotten it and you'd be sitting on set right now. It's truly not about that.
There are also so many stories, and I hope that the actors listening and watching this have read them and have heard them and believe them. But there are so many stories on our end, whether it's in our office or just friends of ours that work in casting as well, where one of the coolest parts about our job, because I think there's a misconception that we, are around movie stars, or we get to deal with, whatever. We just cast The Perfect Couple on Netflix. Go watch it. Great.
Yeah, it's great.
Nicole Kidman is the lead, but we had absolutely nothing to do with Nicole Kidman attaching herself to the project, nor did we have anything to do with a lot of those stars, right? Like we might do the deals of non-star actors, but we're not auditioning stars, right? Like that's a misconception. We audition working actors until they become names, and then they no longer audition. However, because of that, we get to know, and that's the coolest part about this job that no one sees or hears about until they become famous. We audition actors throughout the beginning to the midpoint of their careers, maybe, whatever that is in their timeline. And we get to know them over the course of many, many years, to the point where when Brenden and I came in, a big thing that casting offices do is they create lists. Well, we would create lists for all these roles over and over again, and we started to learn specifically in our office, specifically for our boss, the names on these lists, if the roles were similar, ended up being the same over and over again. Not just stars, but a lot of working actors who you might know and recognize, but they're not stars. It's because over the course of Robert's specifically 30 plus year career, he has auditioned them for 30 years. And then we come into that. Now we've seen some of these people over the course of 5, 7 years of auditioning, and you get to know them. None of you outside of this podcast have seen any of those things because they didn't book those roles. But you do see them 5 years later when they book the role that they've been working on auditioning for us for 5 years. And that's so fulfilling for us that the public doesn't see, because why would they, right? But back to this idea of, I just did a terrible audition, or I didn't, it was terrible because I didn't get it. No, do a great audition, connect with the people in the room, be professional, don't draw it out, leave, you've done your work, and then we will remember the good work and continue to bring you in. It's said over and over again, but that, you're asking what I've learned on the other side, is one of the biggest lessons that I've learned that I think is so valuable. And it empowers you as an actor to believe that you've done a good job in the room and then just let it go versus hanging on to something that doesn't even matter.
Great advice. A question that I sometimes get from actors who worry that perhaps they have done a bad audition or maybe not made the best first impression. Is that something that they can recover from? Is it something that will, permanently have them on some kind of do not call in list, or can they redeem themselves? And will casting forgive a bad audition and still get that actor in the future?
I mean, I think when I can speak for UDK as an office, what I find to be incredibly unique about our office, right, is that the three partners, Robert Ulrich, Eric Dawson, and Carol Kritzer, who've all been doing it for decades at this point, they all independently, coincidentally married actors. So there's something ingrained in the foundation of the company where, and I think many casting, I'm not saying just this office, but many casting offices I'm sure are like this, where another thing I always make sure I want actors to know is often casting is on your side, right? Like, you win, we win, everyone wins. If you're the first person in the door, you bang out an incredible audition and you get the part, everyone's happy. I know that maybe some offices, it may be a bad day and you may walk into a room and it may feel a certain way, but I think that, yeah, I don't know. I think that I feel like I kind of lost my train of thought on that one. But go ahead, Daniel. I'll come back to it.
Well, no, that's completely true what you just said. I think maybe the point that you were trying to make was all of our bosses love actors. And, the question being, if you have a bad audition, how's that going to affect your career? Maybe in a very specific scenario where you get into an office for the first time and you have a bad audition, I guess there's a situation where that could leave a bad taste in the mouth of the people. But the reality is, again, if you're getting in front of bigger offices, you're probably with an agent or manager who we trust. And the reality is, if you have a bad audition and you go and probably tell your agent or manager, what's probably going to end up happening is they'll reach out to us and be like, hey, they were just having a bad day. Maybe they were feeling sick or they were off their game. Here's some more material to show you what they can do. That has happened before because people have bad days. That is a specific example of something that I can remember happening. And then if we have time, we'll watch, the footage and be like, oh, cool, that's great. It's likely that you won't book that audition, of course, if you have a bad, or book that job if you have a bad audition. But I don't know, you're human and we're human and we realize that people mess up, I don't know,
I think that's ultimately,
did I get you back onto your thought?
Yes, it did. That's ultimately where I was getting at, is just that ultimately I think we know you're going to have a bad day. We have bad days, right? We have days where we may not be as sharp in the room. Maybe the notes coming from casting aren't quite as helpful as they were to the group that we saw yesterday, right? Like those sorts of things happen. So I don't think that I've ever really been privy to a scenario where it's like, hey, this person has to be on the do not call list. Like, it's just not in the rooms that I've been in. Definitely not because of a bad audition. But I think Daniel makes a great point, right? Where like, if you have a rep, utilize that resource because they are the liaison, right? They are the person who is responsible for that, for continuing to shepherd the relationship that is this actor with these casting offices. So definitely lean into that instead of maybe shying away from it and not wanting your agent or manager to know that you feel like you bombed it in the room today, but lean into that and have them give us a call. But it's really not. I just don't know that the casting office is as unforgiving as so many actors feel that it is. And I truly do understand why it likely feels that way. I mean, part of the reason why I sit here and say I'm not an actor is because I don't think I could do it. Like I'm aware of how difficult that is to walk into a room and be that vulnerable, emotionally available, and tap into these emotions all to get a job. I truly get like the actor's plight. But just know that I think you're walking into casting and casting wants you to win. So you have a bad day and you pick it up and we try again next time.
Yeah, and also, Brendan, you were saying something that made me think. I think a reason why an actor might feel, and I felt this as an actor years ago, why you might feel like you had a bad audition is if you don't get the feedback that you are expecting or hoping for, which I think that you should temper your expectations and you should go in not with no expectations, but honestly, you should go in, do your work, and really have no expectations. I mean, if I'm being honest. But one of the things that actors experience is if you go into a room and you do your thing and you don't get any notes, or maybe the room feels cold or whatever the situation is, you think that you bombed the audition. And that's, first of all, just not true. Second of all, I'm remembering moments where, if we were in the room and, whether Brenden was running the session or Robert was running the session, whatever was happening, again, we're human, but also things are going on. And if someone, let's say, was on the phone or was distracted for whatever reason, I remember thinking, as an actor in this room, you would think that they're ignoring you. What was actually happening behind the scenes is there was some crisis with either personal life or another project, whatever it was, right? Like it took us personally out of the moment in that room, which felt to the actors like, oh, well, why am I even here wasting my time? Again, like Brenden said, we don't have perfect days either, and we're not always 100% available to you in the room. We try as hard as we can on Zoom or in person, but we also fail sometimes too. However, if you don't get a note in the room, it's not because you're a failure. So I think that you should detach yourself from thinking that you're always going to get a note because you aren't, and that doesn't mean that you didn't do a good job.
Love that. Something that you just said too, Brenden, about casting want you to win. Could you guys maybe speak to that notion? And I think it's just such an important thing to remind actors of, that everybody in the room are rooting for you to do your best work.
Yeah, I mean, I think that for me, in many ways, I feel like the foundation of the business, it's acting, right? I mean, of course, there's incredible writing and there are creatives in so many aspects of the industry. But for me personally, like I became a fan of actors before I was a fan of directors and writers, etc. Um, so ultimately, I feel that so many of us are in this industry because we love actors and acting, and that's what I at least maybe those of us in casting. I think we can definitely, most of us can say that. So yeah, I mean, ultimately, you win, we win. The the most fun phone calls to make, right, are the phone calls to the agents and managers. We unfortunately don't often get to tell the actor themselves that they got the part. The reps get that more fun phone call, but even being able to tell the agents and managers, hey, you got the part, and maybe one day being able to meet the actor. For example, on the feature that we just produced, we worked with Colby Minifie. For me, that was super cool because I've been on The Boys since season 1, right? And I was not familiar with Colby before The Boys. She's obviously an incredible actor who's been doing it for years prior to The Boys. Definitely wasn't the beginning of her career, but being able to have that interface with her and have, I don't know, this thing that we share and being able to connect on that. It was one of my first jobs in casting. I would imagine, is a big job in her career. There is a love for actors as a whole. I think I can speak for the majority of people in casting, maybe not everyone. And so I just feel that, to Daniel's point, even if the room is cold today or tomorrow or whatever the case is, or even if there's a room you walk into that tends to often be cold, as a whole, I do think that casting is, are some of the biggest advocates for actors. And I just think it's really important to remember that.
Love that.
Yeah, and we also get excited by auditions. Obviously, we're watching hundreds and hundreds of auditions, sometimes daily, depending on the situation. And if it's, the same line over and over again, some of that might be able to get monotonous, but I think the reality is, like, I'm thinking of, because a lot of what we do on the shows that we work on, and we've been fortunate to work on some higher end shows, so much of that work is making lists, and then the studio and the network and the director or whomever, the producer, is kind of deciding on who they want to make offers to. That's a big part of the job. And I think a lot of actors struggle with hearing that because they think, well, how do I even have a chance? I can't even audition. Well, we understand that. And obviously, it's a business, so it runs as a business, and those things have to happen in order to get things greenlit and all of those things. But when auditions do come around, we get excited by them, to the point where, I worked on the last season of Shrinking, and a lot of that was producers either reaching out to friends of theirs, as it happens, right? Many offers were made. So for the roles that we were actually able to audition in the casting office, we actually got excited for them. We were like, oh, this is great. This is an opportunity for us to audition. And then that put us in contact with actors, and then again, post-COVID, everything's a self-tape, right? Which is its own conversation. But now post SAG strike, there is a requirement basically that if you ask for a live Zoom audition, we are obliged to give you that. And that changed the game a little bit, which actors should be aware of. You should know that you can ask. So ask if you want to. And we were baffled at the amount of people that didn't ask, at least in this other office. So when we got an audition with an actor live, we were like, oh my gosh, this is so exciting. And I remember one specifically where, it's an actor that we were aware of, and she's on TV, and you might know who she is. And she came into the Zoom, and it felt like we were back in the room because she was so personable and charming and wonderful, and then so talented. It made us excited. So, your question is, talking about casting being on your side, like, we get excited and giddy and, overjoyed by acting. It's why we do what we do. And there's really no one else in the whole space of production that is on your side more. Of course, if you have a rep and an agent and manager, it's in their, financial interest to be on your side. Hopefully they support you in ways beyond financial, but it's their job, right? You are making them money. For us, we don't benefit in that way. Yes, our job is done when you do well, but we're the biggest advocates that exists. And I know sometimes people don't see that or think that, but it's true.
You guys were speaking earlier about the opportunity that you have to really get to know actors over a long period of time. If they continue to audition for 3-5 years before they really take off. I'm curious to know what you guys think gives an actor star quality. And is that something that you've noticed some actors just have right from the get-go, or is it something that develops over time?
It's interesting.
What do you
Yeah,
think?
it's interesting. I don't know. It's kind of hard to tack down because I think that most people would probably feel like it's the actor who comes in and, kind of like the one Daniel just talked about, who was very personable and had them feeling almost like they were in a physical room with them. And you would think that it would be these like magnanimous personalities, but I don't know that that's necessarily always the case. I do think that there are sometimes these actors who walk into the room, say hello, start their scene, walk out the door, and you're kind of gobsmacked. I think that a lot of times, I think a lot of actors probably feel like they should come in the room and kind of charm the room and do that whole the whole charismatic thing. And look, if it's natural and it works for you, it works for you, it works for us. If, and if everybody's having a good time in the room, then great. But I don't know that that's necessarily a requirement to have star quality. I think star quality is something innate. Do I think it's something that you start with? Likely not. I would think not. I would think that it would take time and experience of being in these rooms and building this confidence, and just the confidence of you and your craft.
Mm.
I know many actors who come into the room and just knock it out, home run, and they leave and say thank you, and you never heard another word from them. But again, you're like so impressed.
Yeah, it is unique. I'm remembering, so again, at UDK, there's three partners. Eric Dawson is one of the partners, and he was interviewed. I forget what it was about. It was some show that maybe it was for Monster or something with Ryan Murphy. But anyway, he was interviewed talking about Margot Robbie and how she came in to audition for him for that show, or for some show, maybe American Horror Story or something. And he was interviewed as saying, like, we don't know what to do with her. She's a star. It's funny because, you're asking us, and again, we've worked, for years in this realm, but we don't have a career spanning as long as our bosses. So I don't know that I've necessarily experienced that in the same way yet. Like if it's just like, oh, someone came into the room or on Zoom and they were a star. I don't know. And to Brendan's point too, like there are probably a few over the course of a lifetime that you might run into like that, but I think that is developed over time. And maybe there's something innate, but also, I agree with you, Brendan, but I also do think that that skill an actor has of charming and turning that on for whatever purpose, whether it's in the room or at parties or whatever, does lure you in. And then if you have the chops to back it up, then those two together are,
For
unstoppable.
sure.
But to
Yeah.
his point too, you think about people like Daniel Day-Lewis and all these people who are these recluses and these people that don't want to be in the spotlight, and they um I don't know what the beginning of his career was like. I don't know if the first person that ever auditioned him thought he was a star. I don't know that story. But I would imagine that he wasn't that, right? He's not the magnanimous, gregarious person, and yet his talent was unmistakable. So I think it's all of those things. And I don't know if actors are out there thinking, well, how can I have that star quality? It's like I don't think that's something that you manufacture. It's like that's not something to focus on, or I don't know. It's like if that's your focus, then you're focused in the wrong place. It's like focus on your craft and the things that you can control and let other people think that you're a star. It's a weird
Yeah,
conversation, but
it is. Yeah, it is. It seems like it would be something just organic that you
yeah.
wouldn't be able to control, right? I mean, my head goes to a story of when we were casting the series regulars for Zoe's Extraordinary Playlist. Um, Her best friend, Zoe's best friend Mo, was initially written a certain way. Was written for I mean, a cisgender female role, and we saw incredible actors for it, huge voices. Um, just of various genres and whatnot. And Robert, having worked on Glee and the Glee project, I remember decided to say, hey, why don't we see Alex Newell for this part? Like, hear me out. I know this is not how it's written. I know this sounds like a wild card moment. Alex Newell comes in, of course, as we now know, has gone on to do huge things on stage, on Broadway and
Tony
whatnot.
winning. Yeah.
Yeah, Tony winning. Alex Newell comes in and just like brings the house down. So much so that half of the audition tape has like hardly no audio because he blew the mic. And yes, Alex has the most incredible voice. Anyone who's familiar knows that, but Alex also has a bit of that X factor. There is an X factor there, and you can't just come in on a musical. You can't just come into the room with this huge voice and think that that's just going to do it. There was something very specific that was needed for that role that we didn't know what we were missing. Right? We didn't know what hadn't hit thus far. Alex walked into the room and it just clicked. And even now, having lived through that experience, it's hard to tell you exactly what those things were. But again, I think it was just, if anything, I guess it was just the confidence in their own ability.
I love that. Does how important is it for actors to have an understanding of their type, or of, for lack of another word, their brand or their essence? Because I do think that something that we sometimes see in classes is actors trying to be something other than who they are. What's your advice on that?
It's a good question. Um, I think we've talked about this before, Brenden, a little bit. I don't know if we vary on this. No matter what you are, if you're an actor, if you are in casting, if you are a producer, you are sort of put into a box by the industry and they expect something of you, usually based off of whatever it is that you've done just prior. Right? You're only as good as your last job or whatever that phrase is, which is terrible, but there's truth to it. Um, and just think about any actor that hits it big in a project and I mean, you might not hear about it, but very likely the next 5 offers that they get are the exact same thing for a different studio or network because they're trying to copy that, lightning in a bottle that happened, right? Like you talk about something like White Lotus or whatever, or Big Little Lies and all these shows that have popped up after them that are similar to them in tone and vibe and all that because it's the business trying to capitalize on itself because that's how it works. So as actors, you know, uh, I think that if you have any kind of success in any role, you're going to be seen as that until you prove otherwise. I don't know. People have different opinions on this. I am of the mind that if you're getting offered roles, and I know that there's nuance to this, but if you're getting offers, then take them. It's like take that, type or that box all the way to the bank. And then once you have a claim in that thing, then, use whatever claim you have to go in a different direction and show people what you can do. You think about the Jim Carreys of the world and all these, comedians that have gone to the dramatic space and how people are much more likely to watch them do something differently after they trust them in the space that they're proven in. And then, Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind comes out and you're like, what's going on? Who's the Jim, or whatever example you want to give, and you're blown away. Those are my favorite actors, are the people that can navigate different spaces equally. But they all started in a box. They all started with their brand or whatever you want to call it, whether they decided that or the industry decided it for them, and they ran with it and they had success in it. So I don't know if that answers the question, but I don't know. Brenden, what do you think?
Yeah, no, I think that that's a great way to put it. I do think, I mean, I immediately thought of Jim Carrey as well, Adam Sandler, but I do think that, albeit very true, and those are very great examples, they did come up in a different time in the industry where I feel like the industry is a little bit more flexible now, and I do think that people are willing to um, see people play different. I mean, again, for example, and this may just be fresh in my mind because we just worked on it, right? But it's somebody like Colby Minifie. I think that the film that we just worked on her with is not necessarily something that she is currently, the type of role she's currently known for. But that during the casting process, that wasn't something that ever held us back, right? We had her in, we saw what happened, and that's the road that it took. So I do agree with Daniel though that if something's working, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. If it's working, I think move in that direction. If the universe is pushing you in a direction, swim with the current. But I do think that kind of circles back to an earlier part of the conversation, right? Where if you want to be seen as something in a different space, maybe create a little bit more of that content on your own, and maybe having some of that content of your own, even if it's a short film or a bit of a reel or whatnot, being able to send that to casting to say, hey, yeah, you may know me as the funny guy, but look at me in this. Again, it's like it's grabbing the industry by the horns and saying, I'm going to control the very few things I can, because actors have unfortunately so little control in this business, but I'm going to control the very few things I can. And I think one of the things that you do have control over as an actor is how the public perceives you, or the public in this case being casting, not the public. But yeah, I think if you feel that you're being pigeonholed and you don't want to be, I think find a way to pivot that on your own.
I love
Yeah,
that.
and I think on the other side of the spectrum too, the danger can be, you know, I'm an actor, I can do anything. I'm a blank
Mm,
canvas, paint me. No one's interested in that here because unfortunately, well, and again, we speak from a primarily television perspective, at least in our day jobs as casting. There's no time for that. You know, we make television episodes in 8 days or whatever it is, you know, 10 days, 13 days. And we don't have time to figure out what you are. So you do have to do the work to let us know. Now, I'm not saying that you have to get hyper specific and you have to get a headshot for every single character that you play, right? Like that there are, I think, certain classes and people that teach that, and then we get like 50 headshots in an actor's profile, and it's like, what do I do with this? No, you should have a general understanding of who you are and what you can do, and that is kind of type, I guess. We're not really using that word, but that's what it is. Help us know how to use you. And then hopefully that type or whatever you want to call it, brand aligns with the roles that you're being submitted for. And then when we see the photo that represents that type, we recognize it as the thing that we're looking for. We set you up for an audition, you prove to us that you can do it, and then rinse and repeat.
Fantastic advice. What makes for a great audition, in your opinion, having seen so many of them? What has an audition stand out?
well, off the top of my head, the first thing I'm going to say, because I feel like it's one of the most common questions I get, is like, I don't think, as long as it is not unviewable, I do think that a lot of actors unfortunately worry so much about the the quality of the tape. Of course, your tape visually and audibly, of course, it needs to be good enough for us to see and hear you. But I don't think that people always need to worry about spending a boatload of money making these tapes look, like ultra 4K HD.
Mm,
It is still an audition tape. When we were recording them in our office, yes, sure, we were seeing you in person, but we were sending them to producers who were getting mediocre quality tapes anyway. If the work is good, it'll come through. Um, that's that's my first thing. I feel like I'm always asked, like, do I need to get a fancy background? Do I need a fancy camera? And it's like, if we can see and hear you and you're doing good work, um, I think you're in the ballpark. And other than that, it's just, again, it's that there just is, there's an authenticity, which is
Mm,
probably the most used word, right? But that that is, luckily, I've been lucky recently to dabble a bit in, we had the workshop with Acting Mastery last year, and luckily have been able to do a couple in person recently. Um, and I say lucky because I haven't been in a room in a few years
mm.
now, really. But getting back in the room with actors and just meeting actors has felt super fulfilling. And being there, just being in that shared space together, and there just there's an authenticity, there's a um, I don't know. There's just that organic thing that's so hard to pinpoint and articulate, but you feel a good audition uh, when you're in one. Daniel, do you have any other insight as far as
mm.
what
Yeah,
it's such
well,
a
it's
hard
interesting
thing for me
because
to
it is what you're saying makes sense to me. I think it's difficult to hear for an actor though, because it's like they're thinking like what can I do? Like what can I do physically in the audition to make myself stand out? And again, I think that's asking the wrong question because it's really
Mm.
not even about that. I'm gonna throw out a phrase that's overused and it's like a buzzword that I kind of hate, but it's also useful. You know, making choices, right? Everyone talks about make
Mm,
bold choices. This it's such a overused phrase, and the reason that it's overused, like stereotypes, right? It's like they're based in some kind of truth. Like we watch hundreds of auditions for every role, especially when you're talking about a pilot, maybe thousands of auditions for a role. And especially if it's a shorter audition, right? Like the more pages you have in an audition, the more space you have to explore for sure, right? Which usually, has to do with the size of the role. But if we're seeing the same 2 pages or whatever, a shorter audition, I just remember even when I first came to the office, Brenden was reading with the actors at the time, and like he is such a good memorizer that he just had the lines memorized immediately because we see it so much and we hear it so much that it just becomes rote to us, to the point where like we can hear it and listen to it, not thinking about the lines and know when someone's making a mistake because we know the lines better than they do. But I'm saying all this to say that you start to see in casting, and this is another difference being on this side versus acting, like, I don't know, a percentage, it doesn't matter. A large percentage of people just kind of do the same thing. And you will never know that as an actor because you're not watching the auditions. It's hard for me to articulate this. And I'm not even saying this like a line reading. It's like if you read through the scene and you kind of experience it how you naturally feel like it's going to be, that's probably how 60, 70%, whatever, of actors are going to do it. And so that's why people say make bold choices. Sometimes actors misinterpret that and think that they need to be zany or crazy or off the walls. It's nothing like that at all. If anything, it's like going inward and being personal to yourself and saying, the classic acting thing of how would I react in this scenario? Not how you think the scene is, but what you would do in that scene or however you're approaching it as an actor. Those are the times that we perk up, because the moment we hear something different or see something different, it's like, oh, that's not what the last 10 people did before you. What's that about? That's what a choice is. It's not like this over the top crazy thing. It's just a different way to approach anything. It doesn't have to be it could be the tiniest little thought or pause or movement. It doesn't matter. All of those are choices. But they're specific and they're personal to the people. And the more you can lean into whatever that is in yourself, the more you're going to stand out. So that was a long-winded way of saying make choices, but choices don't mean crazy things. Choices just mean specific moments that you create in your audition.
You know a choice when you see one, but you bring up a great point, and it also makes me think of one other thing that I can say does not make a good audition is an audition, a scene that very evidently feels overworked. And I feel especially even more so in the self-tape realm now that actors have the ability to perfect a tape to the point that they feel comfortable. I have seen people that I know personally do it live and in person, but I've also received tapes where you can feel the choreography through the tape. You can feel how formulaic it has now become because we're not talking 3 takes. We've now reached maybe 8, 9, 15. I mean, and so at risk of using another overused phrase that most people probably hate, I do think sometimes you do need to throw it away a bit. Some of the best, oftentimes I have seen in the audition room where even if it's not casting, but a director or a producer says, all right, you've done 2 for me, do 1 for yourself. Whatever you want, throw it away. I would say maybe 70% of the time the magic is in that take. It's like it's just trusting what you do. It's your craft, trusting what you do and not obsessing so much with exactly what this beat should be because this is how I read it on the page.
Yep. Agreed.
Brilliant advice. Are there any other common pitfalls that you see actors making with auditions?
Well, I think that there are the actors, who, again, I think we understand how hard it is to be an actor and to walk into a room and be so vulnerable, but I don't know that you always necessarily want that to be so evident. I think that sometimes actors can go up there, do an incredible job, but almost talk themselves out of a job. It happens, and it's in the moment you're almost like, well, you're doing so good, and I think an actor should never be afraid. I don't think an actor should ever be afraid to ask for a second take. Whether it's because even if casting says, well, you did a great job, but you don't need it, we'll always say you did a great job, you don't need it, but you can absolutely do one, at least in our office or at UDK. I know, again, Daniel's worked with other offices as well, but you should never be afraid to ask for a second take if you want to do one. But I think once you ask for a third and a fourth, right, now you're showing casting that you yourself aren't feeling what you're doing, right? And
Mm.
and we may be happy. You don't know that. We may be happy. So I think do your take, do your second take, and then again, release the bird. Walk out the door and allow life to do its thing. I think that as much as actors can want to be that charismatic person in the room, I don't know that so many actors are aware of like when that can cross over and actually be detrimental to your audition.
Yeah, that's so true. I have one, but you're not going to like it because it's so hard. And I remember being on the other side of it as an actor. As an actor, for better or worse, you're selling a product to us and we're the buyers. And so if there's a part of that product that we don't like that has nothing to do with the acting, that's a hard pill to swallow. And I don't even mean you as a person. What I mean is if there's any whiff of desperation, needing to get a job to support yourself, that is so many people's scenarios and situations, of course. And now more than ever, creatives are out of work. And so then what ends up happening is the people up the food chain end up maybe taking jobs below the level that they would before, and it all comes down. And then the working actor, where are they left? So there is a lot of desperation. But for better or worse, and I know again, it's hard advice to hear because it's like, well, how I am desperate. I need a job. I think my best advice is you have to find a life, and maybe finances outside of this career. And people don't like to hear that because it's like, well, I don't want a plan B or whatever it is. It's like, I'm not suggesting that you put your dreams aside, but I am suggesting that you have to form and fashion your life in a way that you have a bedrock of uh, consistency and predictability, whether that's financially, whether that's your living situation or your relationships, whatever it is. You have to have that bedrock that you can stand on so that when you come into the room, you are not bringing your problems of the world into us. Because the moment we feel that, we don't want to buy that. We don't want to, it's like we it's just like people. If you have relationships like that, who cares if it's in the audition room? If you have friends like that or your family members, it's draining, and it brings the whole situation down. So it's a hard business and it's a hard thing to hear, but the best that you can do to stabilize your life outside of the room and bring that into us without any whiff of desperation, like I need to book this job or else I can't pay my rent, whatever that is, the better. So yeah, I don't know. That's hard to hear and hard to say, but it's really true. And I think that's a huge pitfall, that we can't quite put into words, but we can sense it the moment that we feel it in the room.
Amen. And another good reason to have your own thing going on, like not just your side hustle, but to be involved creatively in other ways.
Yeah.
Less need when you walk into the room.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious to know what your favorite project has been that you guys have been involved in casting.
Have different ones for different reasons, but off the
Yeah.
top of my head, I immediately think of The Boys, just because uh, it wasn't the very first show that I worked on. I did work on the last season of another show, but I only came in, I think, the second half of the last season. So The Boys really is the first time that I've seen something from conception to the levels that it has reached, and now expanding beyond that one mothership show. So, I mean, I kind of have to give it to The Boys, but then doing things like Zoe's, where there's a musical, or
Mm-hmm.
I always talk about Tiny Pretty Things that ran only for one season, but it was so cool having to look for legitimate ballerinas across the world. It's so hard, but yeah, I mean, I think I immediately I idle at The Boys just because of what it's done.
Yeah, for sure. This is perfect because we have different answers. Um,
Hmm.
my first instinct was to say The Perfect Couple, for very different reasons, though. So The Perfect Couple, I think, and Robert talks about this, and obviously Brendan as well. But as far as prestige cast and television is concerned, I think that was, for lack of a better word, the coolest project that at least I've worked on as far as like the high end talent. So that was incredible to like see how that worked from the inside out, and work with people at that level. However, it was not as fulfilling in other ways because that was I think this is true. Brendan, would you agree? It was like the least auditioned project that we have ever worked on. There were the most offers and the least auditions, I think. Would you say that that's true? Or close to it? I
Probably
mean, what,
close to,
percentages.
yeah.
So all that to say, it was fulfilling in other ways, but it was farther away from, again, the art and craft of casting. We made many lists, and that's a part of what we do, but I personally enjoyed the auditions the most. And so then my other answer to you is we worked on a show called The Winchesters, which only ran for one season. And it was a prequel to Supernatural. However, it was super fulfilling to me because in casting those young leads, we got to audition a lot of actors who either hadn't done a lot of work or who were earlier on in their careers. And to see that process from initial audition to callbacks to chemistry reads. And the lead guy that we cast, Drake Roger, had done a few things before, but this was his first big break. And we went through, I think, something like 15 or more chemistry reads with him. He read every time, not knowing that he was going to get the job. They knew that he was going to get the job, but they didn't tell him that. So he kept coming back and just like knocking it out of the park every single time on Zoom. And so seeing that whole process from beginning to end was super fulfilling to like be involved in the essentially discovery of an actor to them being on television. I love that. So yeah, that's my second answer.
Totally. And that you bring up a good point. I think that's part of the reason why I have such a love for the boys and a respect for Eric Kripke and his taste, because Eric Kripke, I think, and this is not speaking against any other producers that I've worked with, but what I love about his taste is that he's not to say that we haven't cast stars in the show, because we have, but that isn't necessarily the immediate first goal. I think that you can look at the series regulars on The Boys, and sure, we have Carl Urban, who's very much, a name actor in the industry. Anthony Starr led a show before, but a lot of the primary cast of The Boys were very much working actors, but I wouldn't say that they were household names at the time. So I think that there's just something so cool and confident about knowing that what's on the page is so special that rather than like we're going to make stars. And I think that has happened quite a bit on The Boys, and not just with season one series regulars. I mean, I can think of like new series regulars that we brought in season 3, season 4, very much working actors. They've got resumes to back up what they're doing, but they didn't need the flashiest resume to get the job. They just had to come in and hit the ball out of the park, which obviously they did and got the job.
Gen V as well.
Yeah.
I'm very curious to know if Anthony Starr auditioned for Homelander, or was that an offer?
He did audition. Yeah.
Wow.
He did.
Wow.
Yeah.
You heard it here. Secrets of the Biz.
Well, and that, yeah, I mean, look, on a show like The Boys, we're so blessed that it's so beloved that there are so many people you would be surprised to audition for it.
Right.
Because I think just they respect the content that much and would like a shot at potentially being on it. So, yeah, we've been very, very blessed in that sense that we a lot of people will throw their hat in the ring and will fight for it, even if they maybe don't necessarily do that as much anymore.
That's the, we're talking about these like dichotomy of different projects that we have loved for different reasons. Again, when you're working on a project that has the prestige of whatever, right? In the Boys universe, it's obviously its content and the people that are in it and its subversiveness and all of the things. Or The Perfect Couple with Nicole Kidman at the helm. Like you get the opportunity in casting to essentially sometimes field people that are coming in wanting to be a part of the project that you never expected to cross paths with, again, because they're just at different levels of the business. So for us, that's incredibly fulfilling and like giddy, and we're sort of like, fans of whoever these people are, and we're like, oh, they want to be on the show. Yeah, that's really cool. And then the complete opposite, which is you're working on shows that are just at different levels of the business. And it really is more about I was gonna say who's the best actor for the role. That's always what it's about, but it's more about unknown entities it's exciting and invigorating in a very different way. So there's a lot of fulfillment in different ways, and it just kind of depends on the project. But yeah, we've kind of experienced it at both
Yeah,
ends of the spectrum.
there's really no formula, I think, to casting. I think that each job has its own way, its own thing. And then you can be on a long running show like The Boys now for, I mean, 5 seasons. And we kind of are, then you start to know who are the kind of people that tend to live in this universe and who are the kind of
Mhm.
people that we would like to go to. I mean, you start to learn your client. Really,
Mm.
it's client management and client relationships, and but yeah, you can't apply this one casting formula to every gig.
Mhm.
I'm
Yeah.
very curious to know because I don't think it gets talked about very often, but on a project like The Perfect Couple, where you're not auditioning as many actors, it's more of an offer. What is your job in that scenario? Are you working with the director and the writers and producers to come up with a list? Obviously, Nicole Kidman was already attached, but are you also making those suggestions for who to go out with offers to?
We definitely are. And I think sometimes, right, because everybody in the business is watching different things. We have certain people in the office, believe it or not, at our office that like their niche is knowing all the really cool up and coming Brits.
Mm,
Like if you needed to know that list, I could point you in that direction. So everybody's watching different things. So sometimes too, it's not just suggesting people, but it's also educating the client, be that
right.
the director or the producer, and being like, well, you may not have seen this one obscure Netflix series, but this person's on it. They're so cool, and this series is, a big hit with this niche audience, so
Mm,
sometimes too, yeah, it's suggesting and educating, and which means of course we as casting have to stay up to date, and there's like this constant
Mhm.
responsibility to be watching and ingesting and learning. I mean, Daniel, I can think has always been, because he comes from a theater background and has such a love for the theater. He's always been, when we've done things like musicals, a great resource to lean on, because I don't come from that background. I'm much more TV film, right? So it's you assemble a team, you play to everyone's strengths and get the job done.
Thank you, Brendan. Very kind.
Yeah.
I For The Perfect Couple too, you're asking, what did we do? It was also a unique situation. Typically, when you're working on a project, there is a main casting office, and then if you're shooting outside of LA or New York or wherever the main casting office is, then there's a location casting office. We had two main offices. One was in London, one was us, and then one was location. So there was three offices overall. So it presented its own challenges for sure as far as working together in different ways. But I think one of the coolest parts about that was that we got to see, like, from the perspective of another office, which we rarely do because we're just in the same office. And that other office, because they were based in London, a lot of the actors that they were suggesting, when you talk about stars that are global stars, everyone has the same names on their lists. But then when you go down and you niche down to different roles, like the role of his name is Shooter on The Perfect Couple, is an Indian guy. And um, we researched and we created our own lists, and then the other office came with their own list, but because they're in London and that is closer to the part of the world where that exists and there's a larger Indian population, they had some incredible actors on their list that either we weren't familiar with or like, you know, they wouldn't have been generated from us. So that
mm,
was a cool collaboration for sure. But yeah, I think, to your question, what is it that we did if there weren't auditions? Again, we don't have to get into all of it, but casting obviously is so much more than auditions.
mm,
And it's every role that there is, whether there's a list or auditions, it's managing that role from inception to, you know, negotiation to casting. And if it's a series regular, it's done by the studio, but everyone below that, we're responsible for every step along the way.
mm.
So it is obviously a lot of work, whether we're auditioning or not. Um, but yeah, I think that collaboration with the other office was really cool to see someone else's perspective, which we don't often get.
I could talk to you guys all day, and I'm conscious of time.
Mhm.
I just have a couple of final questions. One is, could you maybe speak to what that casting process looks like on your end from when you guys receive a project or your office has won a project to all the way through to that negotiation with that actor. What are the steps involved on your end?
I think the very first steps, right, are we get a new project and we start having character conceptual conversations with the creative team, with the writer director or the producers or all of the above, and finding out what it is, how it is they envision either these individual characters and or the cast as an ensemble. What is the tone of the show? What is it that they're going for? Are there references that we can pull from? And then from there, you put out your breakdowns and you start seeing people. And I think you start seeing people that you as casting think fit the role and the world. And then as you're sending people, as producers are seeing people, you're fine tuning where you may be on the money or where you may have been a little off and need to skew a little more this way. You're fine tuning until you narrow it down to the right people. We put out our breakdowns. We start to get submissions. We start to then turn those submissions into nowadays self tapes most of the time.
How many submissions do you receive on average for, let's say, a series regular role?
Well, it depends to what the role calls for. Obviously, the more broad of the quote type that the role is, you can get thousands. Literally, I mean, you can get thousands. And those are not thousands of tapes, those are thousands of submissions, pitches, essentially. And then, of course, we're emailing with agents, they're calling our phones, we're having more in-depth conversations with some of those agents and managers we have relationships with.
How do you whittle down those thousands into the people that you actually call in?
I'll answer that question. But when Brenden was talking, I was also thinking, I'm trying to think from the actor's perspective and think about what questions they would have. There was something, and I don't actually work in the boys universe, that's Brenden. So you can speak to this as well, I think, Brenden, but there was a situation that you were just casting for a role. I think maybe you're still casting for it, where the role as stated was a certain age, and you went through the whole casting process, meaning hundreds of auditions, right? People submitted, and that means that all of those people's agents are asking, how did they do, and give us feedback and this and that, and what's going on with the role. And then for whatever reason, and I don't know what's going on specifically, but the role age changed. That's correct, right, Brenden, for what you guys are working on right now? And so then, it's basically starting,
or at least it's expanded the search.
Yeah. In which case, the people that auditioned for that role that were right in theory for that role before maybe aren't as right. And so if you don't know what's going on behind the scenes as an actor, you can receive that and be like, well, what's going on? I had a great audition. I was right for this role. Why am I not moving forward? Well, it's the wrong question to be asking, but it's also like, if hopefully you can get, feedback from your agent, but just realize that throughout this whole process that you're asking about, anything can change at any moment's notice. And the reality is that it's almost never a choice that we've made. We are following orders from on high, and then we have to pivot. But because you're in touch with us, there can be frustration there, but it's like, no, please just understand that things have changed and we're trying to facilitate that. So that's a thought that I had. But as far as your question about whittling, I think it can be different for everything, right? But the reality is, let's say there's 1,500 submissions for a role. The beginning of that process is we pull up a page and break down services on our end, or Showcast, I think, is in Australia, and there are different things around the world that are basically the same thing. We typically use Breakdown for US based projects, and it's going through the 1,500 submissions page by page. And again, we can only speak for our office, but the reality is typically that's Robert doing that. Sometimes it's the associate on the project. And depending on how much time the person going through submissions has, it can be a long drawn out process of specifically looking at each person, or if we're casting an episode in 8 days, it's going to be just flying through. We got to do this. We got to get going, which could mean defaulting to agencies that we trust, defaulting to people that we know out of the sake of time. But if there's really time, for example, like we've cast smaller theater projects before where there are many less submissions, hundreds maybe, but not thousands. And so then we can go in, especially if we don't know people in the space, and go into their resume and look, do they have training in theater? Do they have singing credits? Whatever that might be, right? We can be more specific the more time that we have. But on a larger scale, it really is just sort of like a methodical going through page by page. And I would say 99% of the time, whoever's going through them looks at every submission. I can't say that for every project, but a giant majority of the time, everyone is looked at, and that's just their tiny little picture on the page. And it's usually just that. It's, what do you look like on this screen? And are you right for the role? Do we know who you are? If not, and it's a younger role, we might give a little more credence to your training and things like that, or agent submissions, because that comes through the email hundreds of times. They submit in the email, they submit on breakdown, they call on the phone. So we're getting bombarded with the same submission many times over until either we say yes or no for whatever reason. So that's kind of the process of whittling.
Wow. And then from then you call people in for their auditions, and roughly how many might you see for a project or for a particular role?
It absolutely can vary. Robert specifically, and again, I think it probably varies per office, but actors are going to love this because Robert, and now I've worked outside of the office to know that he gives more opportunities for auditions than I can't say than most. I don't have a lot to compare it to, but he sets up probably more people as even in our office than other casting directors in the office do, and that's his choice. For a variety of reasons, but one of which is that he does like to give people opportunities. That does make more work for the office, but it also means that more people get seen. And again, from the acting perspective, that's incredible. I hope that actors don't feel like if they've been sent an audition by an office that they don't feel quite right for, that it's a waste of their time. And, why are they even calling me in for this? It's like, for whatever reason, you're called in for anything ever, audition for it, unless, circumstances, whatever, like, unless you can't, because that just means that you're going to get seen by us. And again, like, do people watch all the auditions and this and that? Again, 99% of the time we watch every audition. Do we watch every second of the audition? Not always. Especially if it's 10 weeks for a pilot and you've got 3,000 submissions per role. You just can't physically do that in the course of a day. But we do watch portions of every tape for sure. And so anyway, yes. So then it gets whittled down to, let's say, gosh, it depends, like Brenden said.
Sure.
50 to 100 per role if it's Robert, it might be less if it's other people. And then if it's a series regular, it's hundreds probably per role. Eventually, you send a batch off. They say, yes, maybe this, maybe pin this actor, but give us more. Okay, here's another batch of 25, whatever, 50. And then you keep going and going until you have enough people that they're satisfied with, that they feel comfortable making a decision. And then eventually you round up all the people that they've liked. You kind of send a link to producers to say, hey, reminding you, these are the people that you responded to, they're pinned or whatever the situation is. And then they'll whittle down, and assuming that things don't change and you have to redo it all again, then from there, if it's Eric Kripke, right, Eric will make the decision, or if it's the showrunner or whoever is at the head, right, if it's a director for a project or if it's a showrunner or whatever, they will make their decision. The producers will concur with them, and then it goes through the whole process of you've got to send it off to the studio who has to approve, and then the network has to approve. And then eventually, once every single person that touches that project says yes, which is a feat. I mean, that's the thing that actors don't always get, is that if you get a role, you have gotten so many more yeses than you even realize, and so many more people support than you think. And even if you get through half that process, and let's say sometimes the studio or network will say no, and they have their reasons, you've still got yes by the producers. Like, they will remember that, and likely they will find a role for you later in the show. It's such a win, even if you don't get the role. But anyway, I'm rambling. Brenden, what did I leave out?
No, I think that's it. I think the only other part of the process that could ever be included in there is, of course, callbacks, chemistry reads, right? Once you've got, I don't know, 2 to 5 favorites, producers, of course, like to see it at play in real life with either another role that's being cast simultaneously, or someone who's already cast. But no, other than that really is the process. I mean, as far as how many tapes, and it's, to Daniel's point, it's just like it varies. So I can tell you this, just because it's been enough years, that when we were casting initially, the I don't want to say the pilot of The Boys because it was never a pilot. It was straight to series, but season 1 of The Boys, and we were casting those series regulars. I mean, we saw thousands. Granted, there were like, I think 11 roles off the top, you know, because you've got all the actual superheroes and then you've got the ragtag bunch of the boys themselves. So there, it was quite a large ensemble cast of series regulars. They're all series regulars, but I mean, we saw thousands, thousands, and thousands, and we were given so much time to cast it. I mean, we worked on that first season. I think it was like 11 months, which in casting is, I mean, that's a big chunk of time. We're not often on a season of television that long. So it really just depends, but I will say we really do watch every tape. We really do watch every tape. Yeah.
And chemistry reads are on Zoom these days.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I hear of in-person casting happening from other friends I know in casting or from actor friends of mine who are going into rooms. So I know that there is some of that happening as far as the projects that I myself have worked on since the pandemic. A lot of that has been happening over Zoom, which, you know, obviously is a conversation that's being had all the time in the industry, but you would be surprised the things that can be accomplished over Zoom.
Absolutely. That's what I was
And
going
the
to say too.
chemistry that can be found.
Yes. Yeah. We, again, obviously COVID changed the world, and we personally at UDK, they got rid of their office about 6 months into COVID. And we were on Zoom ever since. Since then, as I've sort of mentioned, I worked on the last season of Shrinking, which is still, we're all working from home. However, because it's a Warner Brothers show, we did have some in-person chemistry reads. And they were great, and I love being back in the room. But what was so fascinating is that after, 3-4 years of at-home life that everyone's adjusted to, when we were in the room, which is what actors say that they want, almost every one of those actors, whether it was because it was like a weird, like not rusty as far as acting, but like rusty being in the room situation, they were noticeably nervous. And again, auditions are nerve-wracking things. But again, it almost feels like going to Zoom and the self-tape world has empowered actors more than they realize, because you do control your environment more than ever. And even if you're nervous in an audition, you're still in your home or your studio or whatever space that you choose, which I think brings calm. Then we went back in person on the lot at Warner Brothers, and you know how, you go to a studio lot and you get lost and all the stuff that comes back to like, what is it like to drive across the city to audition, and those stresses that no longer exist, put them back in your life, come into the room, people are winded, people are nervous, whatever. And it affected their auditions. So I thought that was fascinating. And I'm not even saying that doesn't mean that being in person is good. It was great and everyone loved it, but there was an adjustment factor to that. So, when we did a variety of shows, all completely over Zoom, and I guess that's kind of still what's happening, Brenden, to UDK. We have gone a little bit in person at Romano Benner, the other office that I'm working at, but yeah, at the same time, I think like Winchester's, we cast that whole show from pilot to, last episode of that first and only season online, all chemistry reads, as we said. And we were kind of questioning would that work too. And yeah, of course there's kinks and weird things about Zoom, but like Brenden said, you'd be surprised at what you can see and feel and sort of like, sense the sizzle between people or whatever it is, if it's romantic chemistry or whatever, or just any kind of familial chemistry. It works on Zoom more than you would think. So it's not a hindrance like some people might think.
Wow. And so you guys, just so I'm clear too, you're now at Romano, and you're
Benner, yeah, that's correct. So, I mean, the reality, Brenden and I, since the beginning of our casting careers, have worked in the same office, and I didn't even know, how things worked when I got into casting. But my understanding from a lot of other people that I talked to was you get a job, you work for X amount of months, and then you're out of a job and you hope that your show gets picked up, and then you might look for work elsewhere or go do a movie or whatever. This is all in the casting space. But there's no guarantee of work.
right.
And so again, us landing in the office that we landed in, and that he's still at, kept us working. For me, for 5 years, for him now, I mean, he's still there. The reason that I left was not for any kind of ill will or whatever. It was literally just that after Perfect Couple, inevitably what ends up happening is that there's not another show for me. The boys universe still exists at that office, and Brenden has been working on that from the beginning. I just don't work on that show.
Right.
So, the job ended and I needed to look for another job. And so I interviewed and ended up at Romano Benner, now working on Shrinking, which I love,
Amazing.
for a lot of other reasons. But yeah, that was the nature of that. And that I think is actually more normal in the casting world, that people bounce around to different offices.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Just
Yeah.
one last final question. Any final words of advice for actors out there that are maybe feeling a little bit deflated, or they're not getting the kind of opportunities that they want right now? What advice do you have for them?
Well, I think it's very evident that it's been a challenging maybe going on 5 years now between the pandemic and then, some of the changes that the industry's had, the strikes and whatnot, that have kind of shifted the industry a bit. I do think that, I tend to lean a little more optimistic and feel that we are headed in, a better direction. I think that the industry had to correct certain things, and I think that the pendulum had to swing one way in order for us to land on a happy medium. I myself look forward to, I don't know what the future holds, but I look forward to like a day where we do find that happy medium where, maybe we aren't necessarily back in the room for pre-reads, because I don't know that that's necessarily the best use of time for casting or for the actors. I do think that when you're dealing with the volume that you're dealing with pre-reads, maybe it does make sense for tapes. And I know a lot of actors who have appreciated, like Daniel said, the self-tape era of the industry. But I do look forward to the day that maybe those chemistry reads and the callbacks and the tests are happening in person again, right? Because now we've cooled it down. You as the actor have put in the work to reach that next level of the process. And I think that feels to me like a great place for the industry to land. So I think as far as advice, it's just, and I think so many actors are already well versed in this in the last 5 years, but it's just remaining flexible and malleable and adaptability, because we don't know what's coming. I think we know that now more than ever. Between those two major events that we've now gone through, I think that we know not to necessarily count on tomorrow looking like exactly what we're used to it looking like. So that might not be the most tangible thing to take home with you, but it really is kind of like all we really can do, which is just being open to rolling with the punches and, making the industry, making the career what controlling the very few things that we have control over.
To add to that, perseverance for any career for sure obviously is important, but specifically because there's no defined path for any of us in this business. Even talking about on the casting side, it's like when you talk about the different levels of casting and sort of moving up that ladder, there's no real answer to how you do it. It's just sort of opportunity meets preparation, which you can say about acting and anything else too. And then you have to wait for that opportunity to present itself. And I know that it's so hard because it's like, well, where do I find these opportunities? There aren't any opportunities. I can't remember. I think it was an interview or maybe it was a video I was watching of some actor who they basically said, I came up in this business with so many other people that were so much more talented than I was, and they were stars, and they could have made it big, and then they just left the business for whatever reason. Maybe who knows why anyone leaves the business at all, other than it's a terrible business and it's really hard. But it's a rewarding, incredible business too for those that persevere. And harkening back to what we said earlier, if opportunities aren't knocking at your door, like we have all experienced in this conversation, we've all been at that place in our lives in different ways, go meet someone and do something with them and get to know them and collaborate with them and be creative and put something out there into the world that speaks to something that's important to you and make it meaningful to you, and hope that it will resonate with. So it's like that kernel of an idea or passion project or whatever, a class, studying, right? Continuing to study, again, persevering through the career, build up your craft, create something with it with people that are passionate about that thing, and then move forward with that. It feels vague, and yet perseverance is like the single greatest important thing, because you can outlast the people that are more talented than you. If you keep going and you make a concerted effort to better yourself, you can't just persevere and just sit on the couch for 10 years saying, you're whatever, I'm an actor, I'm in casting, and then don't do anything about it. That's not perseverance, right? That's laziness that lasts for a long time. Like, perseverance needs to include hard work and dedication and love for the thing that you're doing, and you're still not guaranteed anything from that perseverance, but it's really the best that you can do. So I hope that that's encouraging, because it's hard for everyone, but all opportunities came out of action versus waiting.
That's very encouraging. Thank you so much, Daniel and Brendan. You've been incredibly generous with your time today as well. And we're just so thrilled to not only speak to you today, but to be hosting you again this November. And
Yes, can't wait.
yeah, and look, thank you so much again. And we're also just thrilled to hear about this new direction that you guys are moving in terms of producing as well. The future just sounds incredibly exciting for you both.
Thanks,
Thank
Ben. I
you.
appreciate
And same to you. Thank you so
it.
much,
Yeah,
Ben.
Thank
absolutely.
you.